Hey, welcome to Life in the Leadership Lane. I'm your host, Bruce Waller, where I get to talk to leaders that are making a difference in the workplace and in our community. What did they do to get started and what are they doing to stay there? And today, oh my goodness, here we are. We're in February, season 4, and I have another special guest. Today, I'm getting to talk to Laura Bustamante. Laura is the Vice President of Human Resources at Ag Resource Management. She also has her certifications, her SPHR and her SHRM-SCP, and she's a former president of Fort Worth HR. Laura, I'm so glad to have you on the show. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing, Bruce?
I'm wonderful. I am so glad we finally got together. I've been trying to get you on the show for a while. I finally have you here, and I'm so excited. Everybody's going to have a good time. You know, the last time we saw each other, let's see, it was the Texas SHRM State meeting in Fort Worth. Do you remember
Correct.
that? What you think about that?
Oh, I thought it was great. That's always one of my favorite meetings. Any of the Texas SHRM meetings where I get to see my friends, those are my favorite.
I love that. And I love that how you talk about your friends. You know, you're a former president of Fort Worth HR. I think today you serve in the past, I think they call it the past president's role. Is that right?
I am the past president. Yes, sir.
You're in the advisory role. Like, I remember that
Yes.
role. Like, that is the best role ever.
Yes.
But you know, I always enjoy, I'm the same way. You get together, once you serve in those roles, then you get together at these Texas SHRM events, and it's like it's almost like a high school class reunion, you know?
It is. It really is. Yes. Yeah. Natasha Corrales, who's, now the president of Fort Worth HR, went to the Texas SHRM meeting. I think it was last weekend or weekend before.
That's right.
And I was honestly a little jealous that I didn't get to go.
Okay.
When she told me she was going.
Okay. So Eli was there as well.
Yes.
And what's funny about it is I got 2 texts from a couple of former presidents that said, I miss Texas SHRM. I love that. Yeah, it's just one of those things where you develop these connections and these friendships. And then whenever you move on, it's like, oh, I missed that. And we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about connections, building relationships and all that. So that's one of the reasons I'm really excited about having you on the show. Hey, for those who don't know, Ag Resource Management, I was wondering, would you share a little bit about your organization and how you serve your customers?
Sure, absolutely. So we are a financial services organization, and we partner with farmers throughout the United States. So we've got 28 locations, primarily throughout the Midwest and the Southeast. And we partner with farmers who couldn't otherwise, secure lending options through like a traditional bank. They may come to ARM, Ag Resource Management, and we will work with them to give them a loan. So a loan as it relates to, the land, the crop, equipment in some cases, in order to keep their crops going and keep farmers farming. That's what we say. And I'm actually, both of my grandfathers were both peanut and cotton farmers in West Texas. So that's one reason that I wanted to join this organization, is just because of my family history.
I love that. When you can really make a connection, we always talk about purpose and mission and values, but when you can really connect, like in this case, family values, like that's important to you. And I love every time someone is on the show and they're talking about the organization and they throw out something that just sticks, like this mission. I'm just like, you know what, that's a mission driven company, because you said keep farmers growing. And I love that. So that's fantastic. Oh my gosh, I am going to get to learn so much about you. I'm so excited. And I always like to start the show off with a little bit about, just learning a little bit more about you. And I would love for you to share the Laura Bustamante story. Like, where did you grow up and how in the world did you get into HR and leadership?
Well, I'm from Seminole, Texas, which, remember, we talked about that. You're a Seminolean too, from a different state.
Yes, you remember that. I love that.
I do. So yeah, born and raised in Seminole, Texas, small town between Odessa and Lubbock. Originally went to school my first year at A&M in College Station. Quickly decided that life was not for me. Ended up going to UNT in Denton, starting my sophomore year. I was originally pre-med, so my degree is actually in biology. And I have a minor in chemistry and Spanish, so nothing to do with HR. I started working for a scribe company my senior year of college, which is basically a pre-med student who follows around the physician. At the time was just in the emergency medicine space. So as the physician is talking to the patient, the scribe is taking all the notes and doing the documentation. So I worked at Presbyterian Hospital in Denton. So that's where I kind of started my scribe journey. Was a scribe, became a chief scribe, which is, like the manager of the scribes, and got married my senior year of college, got pregnant shortly thereafter, and basically thought, well, I'll go to med school next year, or, when Landon is a little older. At one point, I was interviewed to come start working in the back office for the scribe company. They said, hey, Laura, we know you have a baby. You probably don't want to keep working ER shifts. Do you want to come work in the office? You can be the regional manager. And I said, sure. So I held that, regional manager role for, I guess, about 7 months. And the company was just in Dallas-Fort Worth, but we were starting to expand first into Miami, Florida, and then we secured a contract in Michigan. And so we didn't have an HR department. And our COO at the time said, hey, Laura, I think it would be really great if you took on this role and started working in HR. And I said, sounds great. I have no idea what that is. But, with my biology and chemistry background, I'll try to figure it out. That was December of 2009. I started in HR, and I was an HR department of 1 for about 2 years till I had my second son. And I was finally able to hire someone to help me the week before I went on maternity leave. So basically I just worked all summer because, there wasn't really maternity leave at that time because the company was growing so quickly. And we grew it, to a huge company working in healthcare. We were acquired by one company out of Knoxville in 2014, and then sold and acquired by another company in 2018. And I think at my height, I had a department of 35. And we had, I guess, whenever I left Health Channels, we had about 22,000 employees. So I was the VP of HR over the whole organization. I reported to the CHRO. So
I thought you was going to say you finally got to hire, you had your second child and you finally got to hire some people. So you started putting your children to work. That is hilarious. Man, I'll tell you what, isn't it amazing though, how you go to school and you have this, like, your thoughts around, hey, here's the path I'm going to be taking. And then here you are in this particular case, 10 plus years later, and you just went on a totally different path, but yet you're still in this fulfilled career. It's amazing.
I know. Well, I think that's the case with a lot of people in HR. Most people don't dream about working in HR when they get older. Right. I mean, like, especially considering the way that people think about HR is like this entity that just fires people, which is obviously not, a very small part of what HR is. But it's interesting how your life can kind of morph and mold based on the choices that you make. Like when I left A&M, and went to UNT, the only reason I started working as a scribe is because I was in this pre-professional, pre-med honor society. And the president at the time, Brandy McKinney, was working as a scribe. And so she roped me into this role. And then that is what, kind of sparked my HR career eventually. And then it's just crazy how, like, people will say, well, do you have regrets about not graduating from A&M and not getting your Aggie ring, And I'm like, well, no, because I wouldn't have probably married the man I married, wouldn't have had my kid, I don't know, there's just so many different things, and it's all driven by a choice, or how your life pans out. So
What you just shared just now, my mind just went to, I was watching this video of Rock Johnson, right? We all know Rock Johnson. And he's on this video and he's talking about the time when he got cut from the Canadian Football League. And his dream was to play NFL football. And he was talking about it's the best thing that never happened to him.
yeah.
Isn't that something like you're just talking about, do you have regrets? Like if I wouldn't have went through this journey, I wouldn't have what I have today. And that's what he was talking about. Is like, if they wouldn't have cut me, I wouldn't be where I am today doing all these movies and all this. And I love that. I'm the same way. I used to, and I think I might've mentioned this before. I bowled a lot. My parents owned bowling center, so I bowled competitively. And I remember I just couldn't take it anymore. I just like, I've got to get a real job. Hey, you said something that I want to touch on just real quick. And because you were talking about how, fortunately for you, you had a CEO that said, hey, would you help us with HR? And you're like, hey, sure. And then you built that, but you said that HR is typically viewed as like the police or, hey, but yet you probably had to shape that along the way. I was just curious if you could talk through any of that. Can you like take yourself back to how did you like shape that and get people to, I don't know, feel, safe's not the word, but just comfortable
Okay.
coming to you and things like that. I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I'm a very extroverted person, as I'm sure you can tell. I always feel like communication is incredibly important. I'm very much an open book. I've been told many times that I'm too direct, and that's great. But I think that's one thing that makes me good working in human resources, because I can have all the conversations, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And to me, if you're going to have a good HR department, then they've got to be open, honest, direct, trustworthy. Got to be somebody to where you can go and you can vent and you can, share how you're feeling with that HR professional. But at the same time, the HR professional has to be able to say, I hear you, I understand. Now let's look at it from both sides, because there are HR people out there that just tell the employee what they want to hear because they shy away from crucial conversations. And that's not me, I honestly, I think I developed deeper friendships in a lot of ways with coworkers like Natasha and Eli, both of whom used to report to me. We can talk about that later. But it's because I will say, well, this is something that I think that would be helpful for you to see. This is the other side of what's going on. Now let's talk about, what can we do to help you to get you to see this side? Yeah, to me, it's just all about being a good communicator. If you can communicate with employees, then you'll be a good HR professional, I think.
I love that. I love how you talked about being open, being honest, being direct, being transparent. And, it's all the little things, right? It's the little things that lead to the big thing. I love that. I do want to touch on, I always like to talk about mentors. Like you didn't start here, right? I mean, you were on a totally different journey. And then, of course you had your, CEO say, hey, help us with this area. Would you talk about maybe a couple of mentors that have helped you get to where you are today and maybe what it was about them that made them such a great mentor?
So I think the first person who kind of comes to mind is Alex Jesbray. And Alex was the owner at Physicist whenever I first started working in the corporate office. He was an attorney by trade, but his father owned at one point the company Physicist Scribes. He was an emergency room physician at Harris downtown. I think the current ER is actually named after him, John Jesbray. And Alex kind of took under his wings the scribe operation. And so when I went to work at Physicist, he was the owner and the president. And he is just one of those people that, again, is very direct and transparent, a great, great, great guy. But if you're slipping and if you have something that is not being done well, wasn't executed correctly, he would always pull me aside and say, Laura, I want to have this conversation with you. This is how, this was played out, and this is how it was being perceived by others. And next time it needs to be perceived this way. Like, how can we get there? How can we work together? And, even today, if I need, like whenever I came to work at ARM, right? He hadn't been my boss for 7 years, but I can text him and say, hey, I'm trying to get this new job. I'm going to put you down as a reference. Like, don't say anything bad about me. Hope you're doing well. And I was a really young professional. I was immature. I mean, I was 22 whenever I started working in HR, and I had a degree in biology. Like, I didn't know anything about HR. But he always believed in me, and he would tell me what I needed in order to make things better. And, I've come to him for a myriad of different things over my life. Like, hey, I need advice on this, or I need advice on this. And he's just one of those people who I deeply respect, and I just continue to see as like a leadership figure.
I love that. I mean, it feels so good to have people believe in you, and you could, like, what that feels like immediately, like when they look at you, the way they talk to you. And I try to instill that in other people, because I know what that feels like. It's incredible, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and to know that even though you both acknowledge you screwed up, or you both acknowledge that there's a lot of room for improvement, you still have a good relationship and the utmost respect for that person. I can remember one time that so embarrassing. We hadn't met our numbers. We were in the red, and we were not profiting, and it was not a good spot, for the company to be in. But I really thought that all of the scribes who were leaving to go to medical school, that we should get them a stethoscope with like their name engraved, and it was going to be like $120 per head. And, let's say there were 20 employees that we were going to do this for. So what's that? $2,500. Well, they're having this big budget meeting. It's like Alex, the COO, all the C's, and I'm just like this little HR coordinator peon. And I go in and I just kind of let myself into the boardroom, and I'm like, okay, I know y'all are talking about the budget, and this is something that I think we need to do. And I'm going to need $2,500. And they were kind of looking at me like, who do you think you are? I mean, we're losing money right now. So the next day he comes to my office, and he basically like reprimands me, but in a way that teaches me a lesson, like, know your audience, do your research, figure out what the audience is discussing. Is this appropriate? Ask yourself questions, and like at the time I was so defeated and embarrassed, and looking back on it, it's one of those things I will never forget. Like, I will never again barge into a meeting and think that I know what's going on. And,
listen, right now, if you're listening to this podcast, you got to get your pen out, get your journal out, take some notes, because I love what you just said. The lesson here was, number one, you've got to know your audience. And number two, are you doing your research? Like, what you're talking about here is you're talking about all these lessons Alex taught you was about developing influence in the workplace. And developing influence is about building relationships, developing trust to where you can get those sponsors and get that buy-in, right?
Yes, absolutely. You can always have great ideas, but you need to know what's going on the other side of whoever you're about to talk to about this great idea,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Was there a moment though, when you're down this path now, and now you're sitting in this top leadership role? Was there a moment though, you look back and you go, you know what, that was a defining moment that I found my lane. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career. Because I mean, look, you got all this, education, biology and Spanish and and I'm sure a lot more. But here you are serving HR. Was there like a moment or some moments that you just said, hey, you know what? I love what I do.
I think there's been a lot of those moments. I think people that have reported to me have been a huge part of teaching me lessons and moments that I needed to be successful long term. Another one of those is like I mentioned, Natasha used to report to me. So she was the director of HR when I was the VP of HR over the corporate staff. And then there was another director who oversaw the scribes. Her name was Hannah Kim. And there was a time where, HR always has to be a business partner to operations.
Okay.
I think that is something I've learned very early on in my career. It's not HR versus ops. It's figuring out how we work together. There was a need, a desire by our operations team to improve our onboarding for scribes, to shorten the onboarding, to streamline the communication, just to professionalize it as a whole. And I went into this meeting again. We had all of our HR generalists and our managers, and then the directors, Natasha and Hannah. And I was like, I don't care what it takes. You have 1 week. You need to get this done. We need to do this for operations. I don't want to hear the excuses. Get it done, get it done, get it done. Well, Hannah came to me and was basically like, you were wrong. You handled that wrong. You didn't ask what else the HR generalist had going on. You didn't look and seek to understand what else was going on in their lives. What were the other things that they needed to get into place? How can we work together to create a timeline that's going to be beneficial for ops, but also works for HR? And it was like an aha moment. I'm like, Laura, if you're going to lead people, you have to seek to understand. It's not your way or the highway. This is your team. These are your people. You need to back them up and meet them where they are, figure out what makes sense, and then be the leader that you need to be. Go to operations and say, this is what we're going to be able to do when in partnering with you. You don't boss us around. We work together. And yeah, it's just one of those things where I was like, you can't just expect your team to do what you say. Because, there's a lot of leaders out there that are very dictatorial and very, you're gonna do this and this and this and this. And from that day forward, it was, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to be perceived that way. I didn't even realize that that's the way I was coming off. And it was just a huge aha moment for me. And so the next day I got everyone back together and I apologized and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't handle that well. Let's go back to the drawing board and let's figure out what makes sense, what's a reasonable timeline. And it ended up being very successful. And yeah, I have Hannah Kim to thank for it.
I got to tell you, I have chills just listening to this story. Because I'm sitting here thinking, I wrote down seek to understand. We got to work together to build that timeline. But the two words that really capped it for me was you got to own it when you know that you've not led the way, not the right way, but the way you want to lead.
Yes.
I think great leaders, they know, what, I need to own this, whatever that is that they need to own. They just own it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, you have to. You have to take accountability and find grace. I think like on both sides of managing people and then being managed.
Well, and that's part of the building those relationships. We're going to talk about connections, but that's the way that people like you earn their trust when they're like, hey, you know what? We don't feel like you handled that the right way, and then you own it. And then all of a sudden their respect just went 10 times for you. They're like, I'm going to respect her even more now because now she's listening to me. I always like to ask my guests about leadership. Like there's so many different definitions. People define it so many different ways. But if someone said, hey, Laura, what is leadership to you? How would you respond to that?
I would say leadership to me is 3 things.
Okay.
Communication, trust, and grace. Because no one is perfect, right? Like I mean, we're not going to get into politics, but if you look at like that level, like Joe Biden on down,
right,
nobody's perfect. Everybody screws up,
right.
whether it be with your kids or your employees or whatever it is, we all screw up. And I think you have to have grace towards your employees because they're going to screw up. No one is perfect. And 99% of the time, mistakes can be fixed, And I think just being able to have that communication where the employee feels comfortable talking to you and you can have open conversations with them and trust is present and grace is in abundance, then you're going to have successful relationships. I still to this day will have employees who I haven't managed in, I don't know, 6 or 7 years that'll text me and say, Laura, do you have a quick minute? I've got a question. I'll call them, we talk, they need advice on something that they're dealing with. And it's just like, okay, let me know if anything else, talk to you later. And to me, that is like the definition of the leadership that I have created and kind of held as I've managed people. If people are still calling me 7 years later to ask me advice on how to handle some particular issue, then I've done my job.
I love that.
Because that's developing people is the most important thing for me.
I love that. Oh my goodness. I love that communication, trust, and just the anchor of grace. And I love that. Well, I mean, it doesn't surprise me when you're talking about, you're all about relationships. You're all about helping people develop and growing people, because I was reading, one of the things I love about interviewing guests on the podcast is I'll go on their, LinkedIn and I'll, do some research. And it says you're an ESFJ on the Myers-Briggs. And I was like, that's interesting that she put that on there, but you're proud of that. I think that's something that I've seen too, just from my time observing you, is that you are all about relationships. I would love to talk about not just the importance of it, but how do you go about doing that? Because there's some people that are listening to the show. They're like, you know what? I've got to get better at this. I've got to get better at getting out of my office, getting out, building relationships, or maybe using some of these tips that you've already shared today. Talk a little bit about the importance of building relationships with your team and how that helps you shape the department or company you want to be.
Well, I think the one of the fundamentals of just being successful in any career is having good relationships with those that you work with. I think if you have any kind of toxic employee or someone who is a negative Nancy or just doesn't get it, it's just like a hateful person, they're not going to be successful in their career. And it's not even that I'm so driven by success where, I wake up every day and I'm like, oh, I've got to have good relationships. But again, I just think being able to be an effective communicator, having high emotional intelligence whenever it comes to considering how to deal with situations and different types of personalities and people is going to make you successful, right? Like I'm a big believer in not only like Myers-Briggs, but like Clifton Strength Finders or even the Enneagram. I don't know if you've heard much about the Enneagram, but those things to me are the tools that every leader needs to go out and fill their bucket with. Because you got to recognize that not every person is the same as the next. How does this person communicate? How does this person communicate? What is this person driven by? What motivates them? So that you can engage and communicate effectively with every type of person that you manage, because we're all different. Everybody's different. The example I had about Hannah, some of the people in that room that day didn't care at all. They were like, okay, we'll get it done by this week. Sounds good. But Hannah, it was more of a feeler. So Hannah was like, Laura, that was terrible. What were you doing? Da, 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 da. And, just recognizing that everybody's different and that you've got to figure out how to effectively communicate with all the different types of people.
So for those that are listening that say, you know what, one of my roles is that I know we've got some challenges in our department. Let's say maybe it's customer service, maybe it's operations, but it's not going to them, it's going to the business unit leader. It's like you said earlier, we've got to figure out how to be a good HR business partner. Give some tips on what people might do to help them develop their people.
Talking to the department head, talking to them about, what are they seeing from a turnover perspective, from a retention perspective? Are their employees wanting to grow? Is it something they're interested in? If you start asking those questions, 9 times out of 10, the business leader will think, oh yeah, like so-and-so has been here for 3 years, and they did mention at one point they wanted to be in a manager capacity. So what could we do to get them there? I think you have to kind of, in some cases, make it feel like it was their idea almost, because operators are very set on the bottom line, revenue generation. How are we making money? How are we bringing in business? What are we doing in order to be more profitable? Which is great. I mean, obviously that's what, fuels HR's paycheck. So I think that's important too. But getting operators to see that there's an opportunity for greater retention, understanding the cost of turnover, seeing how 30 minutes, once a week, or 2 hours a month where we can develop and invest in our people will ultimately keep them at the organization and keep them fulfilled and keep their potential leadership bucket full. I think it's just those little conversations that really help for success in each department, whether it be operators or sales or marketing or my own department. How are my people feeling like I'm investing in them? And if the answer is no, then how can I spend a short amount of time that doesn't take away from the operations of the business to get them better and to get them where they need to be?
I love that. I love that. Get them to see it from, first of all, look from their point of view, but maybe even try to help them let them come up with the idea or the conclusion, and just continue and invest. I love that. Do you have a leadership development program at your organization? I'm curious.
We do. I'm part of a fairly small organization. So
Yeah.
I mentioned that the organization I was in previously, we had about 22,000 employees, and we had a pretty robust leadership development program because we had leaders from all over the country. And I essentially put together a monthly lunch and learn where managers could call in. I always made it interactive, and I would talk about, who knows, a myriad of different things. So here we have about 140 employees, which is much smaller. So it's more of a professional development program than leadership development. We do some of the non-box grids and succession planning and things like that. But as far as actually developing people, I tend to focus on all levels of the organization. So if there's someone who is, let's say, like an office manager, which is like the lower tier of our business support staff, but they eventually want to be a loan officer, then I, periodically reach out to employees and just say, how are you? Kind of like having a state interview in a sense, and checking in. And then if they are interested in being a loan officer, then we'll partner with the business leader who would be the area manager and say, hey, John Smith is really interested in being a loan officer, thinks maybe in the next 2 years, this is something they would like to do. What are your thoughts? Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? Kind of create a SWOT analysis. What can we do to get them there? And, it could be something as small as being a mentor to them whenever they're struggling with something that's going on with their manager or with their role or whatnot. So yes, that's kind of a long-winded answer to we do have a program, but it really hits all levels of the organization.
Well, I love how you shared that, because even like I was telling somebody the other day, even in like Dallas HR organization, 50% of the members, it's a department of one. They're all small organizations. So they're looking for, and you talked about just the small stuff, right? You can mentor people. You can, and I had, honestly, I've not heard someone say stay interviews in a while, but just the stay interview, right? It's almost like that. It's like saying, how's it going? What can we do to help you? And just continuing to check in and let them know we're here to help you develop in some way. I love that. I tell you, there's so much I could talk to you about. I want to shift gears just a little bit into the volunteer leadership side, because I know you still serve on the board for Fort Worth HR. You are past president. For those listening that have thought about getting involved, in a organization, but I don't have time, or there's so much. Just talk a little bit about what Fort Worth HR has done for you in your volunteer leadership role. How has it helped you personally as well as in your career?
First, the whole I don't have time. Anyone who says that needs to go check the stats on how much time they spend on their phone. The screen time report you get weekly. Because
mine are so far out of
but I've heard that so many times, and I'm sitting here going, trust me, if it's important to you, you will make time. You will figure it out. I mean, as it pertains to Fort Worth HR, I was so far from Fort Worth HR and even knowing what that was 6 years ago. I don't know if I've told you this story, but the only reason I got involved was because I accidentally got stuck next to Justin Dorsey on the way home from New Orleans SHRM. And it was Justin on the window, me on the aisle, and then my husband was across the aisle. And it was one of those things where I was going to ask the guy, like, hey, can you just sit next to me? Like, can you switch my husband? And I was sit next to my husband. But anyway, as soon as I sit down, Justin's like, hey, how are you? My name's Justin. Were you here for the HR conference? And I'm going, oh my gosh, like, I don't want to talk to you. Yes, I was there for the HR conference. Oh, well, where do you live? Fort Worth. Have you heard about Fort Worth HR? And I'm like, oh my God. No, I mean, yeah, I have, but I'm not interested, don't have time. One of those like, yeah. By the end of the flight, we talk about HR for an hour and a half. And he's like, got me roped into being the sponsorship director next year.
I think he was the president at the time, wasn't he?
He was the president at the time. Yes.
Yeah, Justin Dorsey. He's a former guest of Life in the Leadership Lane as well.
Yes. Now I've, been the president, because it was one of those things where I got involved. I met all these great people. It was a fantastic year. It ended up being, and I told Justin, one of the best plane rides I've ever had, reflecting. Because I wouldn't know you had it not been for Fort Worth HR. Right. I wouldn't know Mike Coffey, who I look up to as a mentor. Right. There's so many different people. And again, it's all about the choices. I had a choice to completely disengage and just kind of ignore him and get my book out, because I'd love to read and just be like, okay. Right. Or I could just have a conversation with him. And it ended up being this changed my whole trajectory whenever it comes to volunteership and leadership in Fort Worth. Because of that plane ride.
I love how you shape that up, and it's all about choices, right? And it's the little choices every day, making the decision. Do I engage or not engage? Do I go? Do I not go? And it all starts with knowing your values and what's important to you, and being, like in that particular case, being curious, Okay. So, but we were talking about development earlier. You were the president in your role, and then now you're serving as we call it the past president. It's like an advisory role, but it's almost like you now get the opportunity to help. And you probably did that while you were in your president's role as well, but develop the next that is coming up. You talked about Natasha, right?
Yeah. And that's been really interesting, because as I mentioned, she reported to me for probably 3 or 4 years, and she ended up leaving after we were acquired the second time. And then Eli reported to her. So we both kind of worked together. And there's several people on the board who actually reported to me at one time or another. Yeah. And so,
hey, the mark of a great leader, getting everybody involved. I love it.
Yeah. I do lots of voluntelling. So you're going to be the secretary.
But you know what it's done for you in your career, right? I mean, it's obviously it's helped you in some way, or you wouldn't be spending all of that time doing it, right?
Oh, absolutely. And like with Natasha, I roped her in to be the next president, and now she's here. But it's such an interesting shift that she always kind of reported to me, either on the payroll or just in Fort Worth HR.
Yeah.
And now I am reporting to and supporting her.
That's
and
great.
It's been so cool. Like she'll ask me things and I'm like, well, I don't know, boss, like you're in charge now. What do you think? Or I'll say, well, I can do that for you because I'm the past president. Like I'm supposed to be supporting you and doing things. And she's like, okay. And I don't know. It's just been a whirlwind and just one of those things that has just been such a great and fulfilling experience because I've met so many people and I've established so many connections, and I feel like I have so much more to do, and I'm just really excited to see what the future holds.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I told you whenever we got on, the time was going to fly by so fast. We've had so many great takeaways, but I do want to ask you one more thing before I jump into It's Time to Accelerate. And that is, I always like to ask my guests if they've ever been given any advice. Maybe it was early in your career, maybe it was from your childhood, or late in career. Any advice that you just find yourself sharing with others?
I would say something that my dad taught me is to work hard and stay true to who you are. Remember where you came from. Stay humble, work hard. I think I have 3 siblings. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. And, we grew up on 5 acres in West Texas, but we had a 1-acre garden. And every summer we grew, squash, okra, peas, corn, watermelon, cantaloupe. And we went to people in the town and took orders. Like, okay, you're going to want so much okra, so much corn, so much blah, blah. And that's how we paid for our school clothes. And we hated it. At the time it was like, all of our friends are playing and they're like at the pool and we're over here like harvesting okra or whatever. But it's one of the best things that my parents could do for us, because we all 4 have an incredible work ethic. And it's just one of those things that, it's because of that. It's because of the lessons that I was taught growing up that have allowed me to stay true to who I am and work hard.
I love that. Work hard and stay true to yourself. Absolutely great advice. I know there's somebody listening right now that's like, you know what? I needed to hear that right now. So I appreciate you sharing that. This is so good. I'm telling you, I have like a full page of notes here already. And we're going to finish I like to kind of end the show with It's Time to Accelerate. I want to ask you some fun questions. I know you mentioned earlier that on that plane ride, you're talking about, I could have pulled out my book. Would you rather read a book or listen to a book or a podcast?
So I actually do both. Okay. I read a physical book and then I listen to a book on Audible. Always. So, I listen. I got to go through phases with podcasts. I really love true crime. So if there's like a great true crime, like when Serial came out about Adnan Syed, I don't know if you remember when that was all the rage.
Okay, my daughter told me I must listen to that, and I spent hours listening to that.
Oh, yes. I was about to say, Bruce, if you haven't.
Yes.
And so I love true crime, but I just love to read. So I usually have something different genres. So like right now I'm listening to a book called The Change, and it's kind of like mystery thriller.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm physically reading A Woman's Fire
Mm.
or something. I'll have to let you know after. But it's about art that was stolen in World War II by an art thief for Hitler. And then this lady is basically trying to recover some of the pieces. So that's like kind of historical fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, because otherwise the stories get all jumbled in your head, you know?
Well, true crime is definitely number one on the list when I ask people that. And number two, I've always just been like a business book reader. And I was visiting with one of our guests on the show, Suzanne Myers, and she said, "Hey, let me see what's in your book list." And I said, "Well, let me see what's in yours."
Yeah.
And she gave me 2 referrals, and I read them both, and they were like, it just took me to another place. Like The Great Alone was about have you read it?
Kristen Hannah.
Yeah.
It's in my to be read. I love Kristen Hannah.
It's in to be read.
To be read.
God. It's incredible. Crawdad Singh.
Oh yeah, that was a good one too.
Sure. Oh my gosh. Well,
yes.
Let me ask you this. Great leaders, they're just grateful leaders. What are you most grateful for?
Open doors. Open doors that you can either, again, I know I keep going back to choices, but you can either walk through or you can turn and walk away, and it's all up to you. I think I've had a lot of doors opened throughout my life that have just made me a better person and taught me lots of lessons.
I love that. It's all about choices. It's all about choice. Hey, what about like when you're not working or you're not serving for with HR? Like, what energizes you?
I don't know. I'm a really hard worker whenever it comes to all aspects of my life. So when I get home, I'm immediately like cooking dinner or doing laundry or cleaning the toilets, or I mean, I have 3 boys, so they're 13, 11, and 7.
Oh my gosh. Say no more. Oh my
God. So it's just, there's baseball, or they all play different sports. So it's like,
that's awesome.
Sports or piano lessons or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of a machine sometimes, just running.
I love that. You're in that season of life. That's what you're just in that season. I remember when my kids were all at that, junior high, almost high school, and then, college. It's a busy time. It's just busy.
It is busy.
Okay, so here's the last question I'm going to ask you. This is probably my favorite question. Laura, 10 years older, is around the corner knocking at your door, and you're going to go answer that door. What's she going to tell you?
Probably to slow down. To slow down and enjoy the little things. I think sometimes I'm so busy and there's so much going on that I don't just appreciate little things as they happen. And I find myself reflecting on things that happened 10 years ago that I wish I would have appreciated more. So that's what I think.
I think that's one thing I like about the social media when they have the moments and they'll show you like 5 years ago or 7 years ago. You're like, oh man, that was such a great moment. Was I in that moment? That's so good. Well, I will tell you, that is a 10 years older, wiser Laura Bustamante. I love that. I appreciate you coming on the show today. There's so many takeaways here. I cannot wait to share this. For those who are listening and they're like, you know what? I didn't know Laura. I want to learn more. I want to follow her or connect with her. How's the best way for them to connect?
I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if somebody wanted to reach out and grab coffee or whatever, I'm happy to do that.
I will put the link in the show notes so people can reach out. And I always like to say, if you're going to reach out to Laura, please let her know you heard her on Life in the Leadership Lane. It just makes that connection so much easier. And so I appreciate you. I appreciate our friendship. I appreciate the perspective that you shared today. You're just so genuine. And I'm so grateful for you coming on the show. And I can't wait to share this.
Well, thanks for having me, Bruce. It means a lot. And I'm excited to hear the finished product.
All right. Hey, have a great day. I'll talk to you later.
Okay.